You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name is Trent Fleskens, your host. As always, it's been a few months since Mike McGowan from the HIA has been in the studio, and we do promise that he comes back every few months because that's a live space, the supply side in our state when it comes to how many houses are being built, what the challenges are, where the opportunities are, and how that relates to our demand side. And the reality is we've been talking demand since the budget for weeks. We've been talking to sales agents all year, and we haven't really had a conversation since all that chatter about negative gearing, capital gains tax, superannuation, about supply, the other side of the equation, because what we know is really it's demand versus supply, moderated at the end of the day by serviceability. Let's have that conversation, Mike. I really appreciate you coming in, mate. Before we do chat, an update on the market. We're at mid 6,000s in stock level, which is half of a balanced market. We're bringing to market at the moment about 850 properties and selling about 650 to 700. So stock on market is increasing every week. It's allowing more options on the market in the established space. It'd be good to have a conversation about how that relates to the new space. So, Mike, thanks for coming in, mate.
Thanks for having me back, and great to be here.
There's a lot to unpack, and I don't want to rehash all of the noise on the demand side, but I think the first question I want to ask you is from your membership in the new house space especially, which flows from the new land space. How's inquiry been? What's the story been like over the last 4 or 5 months when what we probably think was the peak of absolute FOMO demand?
Yeah, obviously we started the year in a really exciting place, and it was pretty steady and almost predictable as to kind of what it was going to look like. I think from March, when we started to see some trouble in the Middle East, 3 interest rate rises, a couple of budgets, and certainly some questionable housing policies coming out of the federal government, it certainly tempered some of that demand. I would argue that it's probably removed a lot of the tyre kickers that were out of the process that perhaps weren't ready to build, that perhaps they've gone away from the market a little bit. We have seen inquiry drop off 25%. But I still think the sales data that we're seeing come through is reasonably consistent.
Are builders worried at all? I mean, 25% sounds like a big number, but I think if you asked a lot of people in the building space at the start of the year how you're going, they'd say, "You look, mate, it's really bursting at the seams. We're just lucky we've learned how to manage it since the last boom in the COVID times."
Yeah, I think most builders would have 8 to 12 months worth of work in their pipeline, so they're comfortable of kind of what that process looks like. Obviously, as you touched on, we're somewhat restricted in the volume that we can sell because of the land that's available, and there's many people now waiting sort of 3 to 12 months for titled land to come through. So that pipeline's solid, and if anything, it probably gives, I'm sure the sales consultants at the builders aren't particularly as thrilled, but for many of our members, it gives them the chance to refresh process, look at what they're doing, try and bring down the number of white days that are happening out there. And the white days are just the days where there's no activity on site. So whether that's communication, whether that's a reevaluation of the trade base, or an internal processes about how builders go about completing jobs, I think that's given them time to be able to analyse that really closely and hopefully see some continuing improvement in build times as we head forward through over the next 12 months.
Well, let's segue to build times. What's the fastest we could ever expect, and I guess history would tell us this, project builder to build a standard 4x2 in Perth?
I've got builders telling me that they're aiming to get back to 5 to 6 months.
That's great.
It would be fantastic.
No white days though. That's what
exactly. But I was over in Queensland a couple of months ago, and they're doing it over there for a 2-story product. So it's not to say it can't be done. It's just obviously we need more trades,
different methodologies,
methodologies to be able to fast track some of that. So I think that's the target that most builders are getting towards. I think we're probably around 10 to 11 months at the moment for a pretty standard build. And then obviously some flexibility. Some are coming in well inside that, and some are taking a bit longer.
I think when we think about our completions and starts data, it has to indicate that we're taking more than a year because we're starting more than we're completing. if that makes sense, every 12 months, right? So it means it has to take more than 12 months on average for our homes to be built. That isn't where it needs to be for us to be bringing that supply on market as fast as we'd like to start to close the gap with the 40,000 house deficit we're currently sitting on, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why we need more skilled tradespeople. We started 20,000 homes 12 months ago. In the last 12 months, we've started 24,000 homes. So you'd like to think when we get to this time next year, we're seeing data that comes through that says we're finishing 22 to 23,000 homes. So as we touched on, build methodology might help bring that down. More skilled tradespeople helps bring that down. And just continuity within the building environment is going to help that as well.
Now, that's still below our targets. Last time we spoke, it was one of the most stark mic drop moments when I asked you, can we build more than that? And you said, I don't think so. Has that view changed?
Not in the short term, no. So I still think probably for the rest of the decade, we are going to be building somewhere between 20 and 24,000 homes per year. And that's simply based on the fact that we don't have a huge volume of land supply that's going to change that figure. I still think there's issues around high density feasibility that mean any of those projects that do go up, we're not going to see completed in the next 2 to 3 years anyway.
Because that's the delta, isn't it? That would have been the extra 10,000 if we were going to go for it. It probably wasn't going to come from the house and land space anyway. It never had.
I think our house and land space is probably as good as we want it at the moment. I think we're seeing 12 to 13,000 lots being produced. I'd argue that's about right. Maybe 4,000 or 5,000 coming in brownfield spaces and in developments. And then, we need to see that high density number get back up towards 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 homes to be able to make sure that we give people housing diversity, give them the ability to live where they want to live and not necessarily just have to go into the greenfields because that's all that's available.
You cover apartments. You're not seeing it.
We're seeing the sales. We're not seeing the starts, I guess. And I think that's still a case of I hate looking backwards too much, but we will regret losing the likes of the Pindans, the Jacksons, the Pro Builds that were able to build the affordable apartment. It's really Finbar now and probably a couple of other smaller players that can do it on scale. And most of the other high-density builders are operating in the high dollar space.
And they're limited by what sites are available and how many fairly well-off retirees want to buy into those spaces as well.
Yeah, and I guess those wounds are raw as well, right? So if you were a builder and you were looking at what market segment you might step into, when you're operating at tighter margins because you're trying to build affordable product, it doesn't take much. And as I said, within a 3-month period, we've had price increases, material delays and interest rate rises, and they all taken effect.
Tell me about those price increases and those delays. Obviously, there's some effects that have come out of the war. A lot of people have said that there's going to be a latency in that. You probably weren't going to see a lot of the impact. The reality is, though, as a developer on my side, we saw the emails coming in within a couple of weeks saying, hey, it's impacting our fuel, our transport. We need some sort of force majeure situation here where, Trent, you help us pay our bills. And you've got to ask yourself a question, really. Do you want the same thing to happen as happened 5 years ago, where a lot of these builders just go broke? Or do you dip into your pocket a bit to help support the industry so that you still have some choice of builders in the next couple of years? I think people were probably a little more scared than they needed to be at the time because we don't know how long those things were going for. But you're saying that it did have an impact. It is having an impact on more excuses by suppliers and wholesalers for price rises, which then has to filter on to the next fixed price contract.
Yeah, I think we're still seeing annual increases of somewhere, let's say, 4 to 5% in the price of materials.
That's $25,000 bang on the same house year to year.
And then if you throw in what happened through April, and you're right, within a fortnight, everyone had a price increase. We were trying to work out, was it a fuel cost? Was it a material?
Was it gouging?
Product price? Was it gouging?
I reckon a lot of it was gouging.
There was a fair amount of it that was a guesstimate of kind of what it might cost a business and probably a little bit of mayo on top to give them extra comfort because we didn't know how long it was going to go for. I think majority of the industry, though, worked reasonably collectively and the wounds of COVID were still so raw that everyone took a bit of a hit. I think some companies did really well as including it and leaving it as a levy rather than trying to bake it into an overall price increase. And as Obviously, the federal government stepped in and reduced the excise. Some of those start to come off kind of May, June. I think the overall factor is, though, that an annual price increase now has gone up from 4 to 5%, probably to 6 to 7, to be able to absorb some of that costing.
What happens there, though, when you've got interest rates rising? People are hitting affordability limits left, right and centre. They're hitting the 850 cap in the 5% deposit scheme. Land is getting more expensive to develop in lockstep because they've got a lot of fuel and things getting delivered to develop that land in the first place too. So what's got to give?
Well, we reached that affordability cap at the end of the day, and I think there's lots of discussions at the moment, and you touched on it at the beginning, around is the reduction in demand or interest or buyers a factor of federal government announcements around capital gains tax and negative gearing, or is it a factor of 3 interest rate rises and an increase in material prices?
Were you saying it would have probably happened anyway? It was happening anyway. It was getting a lot less workable without the budget, and then the budget was another kick in the guts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's certainly just prolonged any anxiety that we traditionally felt around that budget period, because there's still so much uncertainty about it. And it's not just the buyer, it's the businesses that are around it, you know.
So that invariably means less supply over the medium term.
Well, I think that the federal government Treasury papers talked about a reduction of 35,000 homes as a result of the implementation of this policy, which is crazy when we're in a supply challenge.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it?
And it is. And to our own state government's credit, I think they are doing what they can to try and increase supply, and whether that be ARCO changes or supporting skilled migration, supporting apprenticeships, they are, to steal John Kerry's phrase, pulling every lever they can. And it's frustrating to see a federal government kind of working in the opposite direction to stifle some of this.
Off air, you were talking about changes to building methodology be something that is part of the plan to help broaden our supply base. Now, we've been hearing that for years, and to be frank, I don't believe most of it. It just seems like a bit of a catch line of, we're looking into alternative methods, we're looking into alternative materials. But is it starting to become more of a reality now? None of this happens unless your Dale Alcocks, your Summits, your home groups, your
Scott
Park Homes, all these big groups actually turn around, look within their supply chains and go, you know what, we just cannot get enough of these houses done in time, relying on one brick supplier and one trade of bricklayers. Let's look more into the framing, timber, steel. Is it happening more, or is it sort of just more talk still? What's the update there?
No, I certainly don't think it's talk anymore. I think Summit, as you mentioned, have gone and are now probably producing 70% of their product as a framed brick veneer product.
You're not seeing a lot of pushback? No.
But if there's some speed benefit, I don't think people are hanging on to double brick as something that they need to do if there's other options out there. I do think we've seen over the last 10, 15, 20 years that you talk about is a bit of chicken and the egg. So the manufacturers and suppliers don't want to invest until they know that they've got a commitment from a builder, and a builder's not necessarily willing to invest until they know that a manufacturer and supplier can actually deliver.
And then they have to condition the market as well at the same time.
100%. So I think the smart move by the state government was the Housing Innovation Fund, where they've provided up to $5 million to probably about 10 or 15 different projects over the course of the last month to help them scale up and bring in new equipment to be able to deliver this.
So and I think big engineering firms knocking out a crap load of steel framing.
Roll forming, whether it's timber or steel, there's a little bit of modular stuff in there to support the growth that we've seen in that area, but it is to increase the capacity of alternative methods of construction to be able to support growth. Now, I think that term modern methods of construction gets thrown around a lot, and no one really knows what it means.
Yeah, not a lot actually happens in the background of it either.
No.
It's like a slide on a presentation at your annual review, and people sort of glaze over it knowing, I didn't see any of that this year.
Yeah, so what I think it means for WA is over the next 5 years, we'll go from probably 70% double brick, 30% brick veneer, and probably in 5 to 8 years' time, we're probably at 60% brick veneer and 40% double brick. So there's a shift. It's going to continue to happen.
It's a revolution, Mike.
We're going to catch up with the rest of Australia, and I think there's benefits in moving into that space.
Do you see a world before you retire where double brick is a unique product in the spectrum of builds that year on your last year before retirement, where it was just a special build, a couple of hundred stonemason style bricklayers still out there plying their trade? Or is it something that will always be a part of the fabric of our 20,000 houses a year?
I think in WA we're reasonably patriotic, so I think it's always going to be something that is a key part of our construction methodology.
And architecture, right? It's a part of architecture.
And it provides an amazing amount of flexibility to change the direction of your building every 30 centimetres. I always think brick's going to play an important role. It's probably just not as significant. And it probably can't because we don't have the capacity here. If we want to grow and we want to build 25 to 30,000 homes because we want more people to come to WA, we want it to be a thriving metropolis.
That's right. Can't keep being in the same number, right? Because as a percentage of people in the state, it actually keeps dropping.
Yeah, so we need to find other ways to support that growth. And I think we've been really clear that it's not one versus the other. It's just a collection of both to be able to deliver more.
And I want to tie back to that now, actually. The reality is, the last time we had a peak in construction numbers for the year was back in 2016. I think we built close to 30,000 homes off the top of my head. Now, our population has grown 20% since then. So you'd think that number we're targeting is 36,000, right? That would be being equal with something we did 10 years ago. You're just announcing 20,000 was our last year. So we're 16,000 houses off just being parity on what our peak was 10 years ago. Add that up over a few years, it's pretty easy to see why we have a deficit.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's been widely communicated that we've gone from 30, we went down to 10, we've gone from 10 to 20 in the last 5 years, which in some ways is great. If you said we're going to double our capacity and delivery in 5 years, I think that it'd be honourable, but it's still not enough. No. And I think expect somewhere around about 60 to 65,000 people to come to the state every year over the next 5 years. So
that's a deficit. You don't have capacity for more than 50 if you look at your numbers.
That's 25,000 homes a year we need just to be able to keep those people. So that's why things like continuing to push for different methodologies, higher density and more skilled workers now helps support that in the future.
Matt, I think that was a really efficient wrap-up for us on where the market's at right now. And I think the point to make here is that supply is steady. Whilst the demand side has seemed to be kicking the nuts over the last couple of months because of those factors, mainly in affordability, to be honest, but reinforced by the budget over the last couple of months too. It's not like we're seeing the supply side really overdo it right now and be a part of the problem when it comes to people's nerves on house prices. I actually think that we're finding a really reliable level of supply right now when it comes to that equation. So what that means for me is it's a watching brief on the demand side as we come out of winter eventually into spring and people sort of move past that, and then really having a watching brief on interest rates, because I think that is going to be the big modulator on our ability not only to buy established property but to get to the table at the house and land space, at the apartment space, and actually afford what's being priced up, because I think that's probably the biggest piece of friction now. It's, can I afford to buy this $1 million house and land package on the urban fringes for most people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the resilience that the industry showed over the last sort of 3 or 4 months to be able to tackle a number of challenges that have been thrown at it but continue to consistently deliver supply has been really encouraging. And I monitor social media pretty closely just to kind of see what some of that sentiment is. And certainly the volume of dissatisfied customers has dropped. I think the communication coming out of the industry is a lot better than it was. And I think now you're right, it's around what can we build for how much as we look into the future and where. And for me, that's the fascinating part of what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years as we see people innovate. The industry's probably ripe for a disruptor to come in and challenge the status quo. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I'm really excited to watch and find out.
You're not one of those admin on Dodgy Builders Perth, are you?
No. Just a first-time caller, long-time listener kind of guy.
Quick plug, Tim Reardon's coming into WA, your chief economist, who lives over east. He's one of our favourite guys to get in this podcast as well. So he's going to jump in September on the pod, but he's also going to come over and do a luncheon. Can we plug that? Yeah, September 4 at the Westin, we've got one of our economic lunches. We generally do 2 every year, so Tim will be across. He'll talk, I guess, really well about what's happening at a global level and how that affects
what's happening is here both across Australia and locally. I think there's some really interesting things. We've got Victorian elections towards the end of this year, and everyone's watching that really closely. We've got the Brisbane Olympics that aren't too far away. They're going to really impact supply of workers and what that means for industry locally. So encourage anyone who's interested to get along, get on the HIA website. And we'll also have a panel of builders there that'll be talking about
some big heavy hitters as well.
Yeah, we'll announce those in the next couple of weeks, and really keen to see what their insights on the market are as well.
Guys, if you're listening, I don't often plug many things, but I think it's a very interesting one for you to jump on. September, Economic Outlook Luncheon. Get over to the Westin, get yourself a steak and a bit of potato gratin, and get yourself a ticket on the HIA website for that event. It'll be well worth your time. Mike, thanks so much for coming in, as always. Love having you on, and love the honesty, the candid nature, and just that reality that this is it at the moment. This is what we can do. It's what's comfortable. It's what's safe. And really, the rest of the equation is affordability, migration, and that leads to the demand side as well.
Thanks, mate. Always good to come in and have a chat.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!